Thanks for inviting us here. It's a pleasure to be here. And we will start and say a little bit on our way of working. Then we say how we relate to the topic of war in general and also on the notion of crisis. And then we will show a couple of recent works and talk about it. So maybe we start with the name. Klub Zwei is a name that's coming from a TV series. It was a discussion series done on Austrian television, and it was a political broadcast. So people were invited to discuss certain issues, and that's how we decided to use that name for us, because in our work we're dealing mostly with socio-political issues, and it's not only about these issues but on how these issues are represented in film, in television. Is it okay with the mic, or should I? And so that's how the name came about. And what's also very important is that we work collectively. Klub Zwei is mostly Simone and me, but then we also have cooperations with other groups, because we feel when working on the issues of migration, for example, and racism, it's not enough that we as artists address these issues and put ourselves in relation to it, but also to establish a cooperation with migrant women's groups, for example, and to form a coalition between us and see how they see these issues. One thing which is also important, that we in our work try to create intersections between different fields of production. We have, for example, edited a magazine which was called Before Information, together with other people, which was very much about creating intersections between people working on the same topic but in different fields, for example in art, in science, in politics, and so on. Maybe I come to the question, how do we relate to war or today's topic? In the last years we have really dealt a lot with the effects of the Shoah and on second and third generations today. So how does history, National Socialism in particular, affect societies in the present? And I start with reading a quote from a novel which illustrates a little bit these effects. Every morning when she woke, she was back in the camp. Then she lay with her eyes shut tight, feeling the sheets, and that reassured her. Here it was clean, and no block enters screamed. She did not mind the American doctor, but when the German doctor came, she turned her face to the wall. The orderlies were German. Then the orderly found a cache of bread she was hiding in her mattress and threw it out. Jacqueline was furious. That was her bread she was hiding in her mattress. It was her little food bank, bread she had saved from every day in case the next day there was none. In the camp, if you could save a little bread, you might live. That day the nurse came into the ward and yelled at the top of their lungs to all the patients that the war in Europe was over. Most of them lay and stared at her. Their war would never be over. So in this quote, it's a quote by a novel, from a novel by Marge Piercy, and it's called Gone to Soldiers, and it was written in 1987. And it's a lot about how these effects of the war on camp survivors, but also their descendants. So how does the past live on in the present?
And then we also found this book by Anne Karp. The title is The War After, and she's also a daughter of camp survivors, and she wrote in the book about her experience and the after effects on her as the daughter of camp survivors, and and she describes the fears her parents had, and this book was very interesting for us to read when we were in London and met our interview partners. We did a film, it's called Things, Places, Years, and we met women in London, Jewish women and also women who work in the field and dealing with Jewish topics. And in the film we also concentrated on the after effects of Shoah and National Socialism. And
maybe we come back to the film a little later on, because before we want to talk a little bit on the role of images. So this is in a way a second theme which is very important in our work, that when we address a political topic, we also look at how images contribute to how, for example, the history of National Socialism and the Shoah is seen in the present. And we've done a little experimental video. It's called Black and White, the back of the images, and it was made during the film process also, when we did the longer documentary film in London. And maybe we show the film and then later on talk a little bit more about it.
We have images here in my albums, which were taken by the Nazis, and also images which were taken by the Allied forces. They live together in one album, and they are contrasting. They had a contrasting purpose, and this gets lost. This is a Warsaw Ghetto uprising, and it's like an icon of the Holocaust. Some pictures are used and overused, and this is one of them. So there is a lot of controversy about some pictures. Sometimes they don't have captions, or the caption is used wrongly. The meaning is always created by the context in which the picture finds itself. Sometimes television companies and film producers and the survivors use images just to authenticate an event. it's very difficult when you come to memorize, to include it into the memory of the Holocaust, what you really remember. Because the picture is not the survivor who talks about their experience. It's not him or her in the picture. It's just an event. So sometimes this meaning which is created is fictitious. What do you remember? What sort of meaning do you create?
So sorry for the quality, it's rendered in the wrong way, I think, but I hope it was possible to read. This work is somehow very important for us because here there was somehow a break to our earlier video works, because there we used a lot of found footage from TV and films, and here there's an interview with Rosemary Meir from the Wiener Library, and her talking about this photograph. We started to deal in another way with this interview and the image she's talking about, and it's produced during we were working on the film, and so it's somehow a product which came out of the whole film project. And this work now is translated into 9 different languages, because when we had the possibility to show it, for example, in Sofia and in Bucharest, so we also translated the work into these languages, and so it's really possible for people in different cities to read it in their own language. And so the last exhibitions where we were showing this work, we decided to combine it with theory texts, and for example we used a text excerpt out of Marianne Hirsch's text on photography, and there she's talking exactly about the same photograph than like Rosemary Meir is talking about. And Marianne Hirsch describes that this photograph sometimes is not shown in its as the whole photograph, so that sometimes in school books or in in books it's the edges are cut, and so it's not possible anymore to see the SS men standing with their weapons, and so if you have the whole photograph, you can identify it exactly as the photograph it is, as a perpetrator's photograph. And so if you, as a viewer, you also have this perspective of a perpetrator. And so she's thinking of this point of view. And Rosemary Neff describes in the text that sometimes from the photograph you don't know who took the photograph. So this one is very explicit, but there are others where you need to look at their backs to find out about the photograph and who took it. And I think it's, for us it was really important to have these texts combined and linked to the work, so to show that there are other theorists thinking about these aspects of historic photographs.
Maybe we should ask, do you know the photograph? Do you know which photograph it's about? It's a very famous photograph from the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, where you see a young boy with his hands up, and sometimes you see in the image only the boy, as Simone has mentioned before, but when you see the whole photograph you have SS men with guns pointing at this boy. And also sometimes the context is left out, because this was a photo, it was part of an album which consisted of 45 photographs which were made, and they were intended to be given to Himmler as a present. And Marianne Hirsch also writes that it had a caption saying there is no longer a Jewish residential quarter in Warsaw, and it has an exclamation mark at the end. And Marianne Hirsch writes that when you look at this photograph, you look at it under this exclamation mark, because it's a perpetrator photograph, and you are put into the position of the perpetrator when you look at it. And so she asked the question, how can these photographs be shown without putting the viewer into this position of the perpetrator? And also she makes a distinction between who looks at these photographs. It's a difference if descendants of perpetrators look at this image, or if descendants of survivors or victims look at this image. There's different things going on, and that's what we also wanted to discuss with our work. And so her text gives an extra aspect to it. And then what she also talks about is the gender perspective. She says that very often images that show children in a way that they are victimized the second time, and through this victimization the young boy is also feminized. And it's a very interesting view she has. And she says through that feminization the perpetrator gets more and more distant, and is also hyper-masculinized through that. And so when you as a viewer identify with that position, the real perpetrator gets out of view. He gets beyond reach and is like beyond reality. And so she says that's a very problematic process that happens, because then you only look at this victim and there is no more perpetrator around. They are more like a symbol.
So this is an installation shot from Berlin, where we were able to show the video in, I think, 7 different languages, and there you can see how we used the text and how we presented the text of Marianne Hirsch. So there were two of these pages in the exhibition. And it's also in this little catalogue for the series of lectures here and the exhibition. And I also can show another example. From London, and there it was part of a group exhibition, and two monitors showing English and Polish version. And so maybe now we come to our film.
Maybe we come back to the after effects of National Socialism and the Shoah in the present, and to our film Things, Places, Years. There's also a book which we made, but maybe first we talk a little bit about the film. And it's very important. Shall we show something before, Simona, and then?
Wait.
Which is a very strange sort of feeling that I had. I had this non-family and a non-background. And I don't know if I told you once before, but in fact I had to tell a doctor my medical history, my family's medical history. I said, I don't know. A, I don't know the medical history of my family anyway, and B, most of them didn't survive long enough for a proper medical history to be revealed. So, you know, I can't tell you whether my bones are going to crack up, and I can't tell you whether there was, I don't know, strokes, history of strokes, and I don't know.
So this excerpt is also an example for how we edited the film. So we shot also these places in London that are important to our interview partners, and for us it was one possibility to give the viewer time to think about what the women are talking about. And so especially this aspect of not having a medical history or not having grandparents, I think this is something which is very new to the children of the perpetrator society, because there nobody thinks about not having a medical history or not having grandparents and what that means.
And also the maybe we say something on like the concept of places in the film. We interviewed 12 women. Not all of them are Jewish, but some work in an institution, like the Institute of Contemporary History and Wiener Library in London, which is the oldest Holocaust archive that exists in the world. And actually its history is linked to Amsterdam, because Alfred Wiener, he fled to Amsterdam from Berlin with his whole collections in the 1930s. And then he when it became too dangerous for him to stay in Amsterdam, he moved on to London with all the documents he had collected. And it's really very interesting archive, like for people who also are interested in finding out more on the subject. This is really a library you can't imagine what they have. They have a big photo archive, press cuttings, and also the latest research on the topic. And so when we met all these women, the library was a very important source also to find out about them. And the places concept came from the women in a way themselves, because they relate to place in a special way. Like having being attached to a place is not normal for them. On the contrary, sometimes for them it's very difficult to love a place or to relate to it. So their relation to place is more something which they should not do too much, because it could be that they have to leave the next day. And you must think that this is the second generation or even the third generation, and not the first. So it's very interesting how this very loose relationship to place is passed on between the generations.
So we show another little excerpt out of the film.
Yeah, this was a postcard that that I came across a few years ago from a New York artist called Melissa Gould. Her father was Austrian, and so she did this postcard, a souvenir in 1938, which she called Schadenfreude, part of a series called Schadenfreude. It's witty and very sharp and straight to the point, and deals with the subject of what happened, but not in a sort of sentimental way that just makes you sort of intone some kind of a phrase, like, we shall never forget what happened and it will never happen again. I mean, it's just on a completely other level to that, because it takes something from the past and it puts something in the present onto it in sort of this new way, in this very, it's very sort of, it's like a punch in the stomach, and yet I think you know that it's true. And particularly in a city that is so proud of its history and makes so much of its economy out of tourism and souvenirs. So why shouldn't this be another part of that, another artifact from then?
And this is also one link to Vienna, and so this places question was also linked to Vienna and Austria, of course, and so we learned a lot from the view from the women, so not being in Vienna but to look at it from a distance. And so this was also an aspect in the film, but there was no, we didn't show any images of Vienna, so we only talked about their relationship to Vienna and Austria. And some of them were visiting the city, and so, for example, also Catherine Klinger, she told us that her family was going to Switzerland in summer for holidays, but very close to Austria and like nearly possible to look over the border, and that it needed 30 years till her mother could go back to Austria and stand it to go to Vienna and see all the places she knew from her childhood and when she was a young woman, and that it was really, really hard for her to see all these places and not really change, that they didn't really change, and but all the people she knew, they were not there anymore, and that was really hard for her.
Catherine Klinger was the woman you just saw in the excerpt of the film. And she also said it's a phenomenon which you find among second and third generations of survivors a lot, that the parents were going to a country which was maybe 100 kilometers distant from the location in Germany or Austria where they had lived before the war, and that they always went in this 100 kilometer distance on holidays because they couldn't bring themselves to crossing that border, but in a way wanted to, which we found also very interesting.
And what I found out also about myself, that it was really important to hear the women in London talk about this time and National Socialism, and to hear this very different point of view and this different language than I got to know. I'm from Germany, and in my history lessons, so to hear all this repetition of this language of the time, so it was really important to get this different point of view, to be able to get into this whole topic again. And I think that's also linked to a little film scene we want to show, which is not filmed by us.
Maybe before, there's also what we learned from the women was this difference between how history affects the second and third generation of survivors, their children and grandchildren, and how it affects the other side, the children and grandchildren of perpetrators and collaborators. And this little film scene, it's a film by Marcel Ophüls, and it's called The Memory of Justice, and he was one of the first people who addressed that issue in a film and interviewed descendants of the perpetrator and bystander side.
So this is from 73 to 76. He worked on that film, and this is a excerpt where with his students in the US, and he brought his German wife to the class, and they could ask her different things.
Bekommt neue Lesebücher. Das erste wurde kürzlich fertiggestellt. Es ist für die Kinder des zweiten Schuljahres bestimmt. Der Chef der amerikanischen Militärregierung für Bayern, General Müller, erhält das Probeexemplar des Buches, das in einer Auflage von 180.000 Stück erschienen ist. Dieses Schullesebuch wurde nach neuen pädagogischen Richtlinien von einem Volksschullehrer zusammengestellt. Es ist reich illustriert. In der Schule war es ein großer Tag für die Kleinen. Der erste Unterricht mit dem neuen Schulbuch.
They really seem pretty enthusiastic about the books and things. Did they know what the books were like?
The new books. I guess I liked them very much because they were prettier.
Zuerst wird es eifrig durchgeblättert. Soldatengeschichten und der Krieg sind aus dem neuen Schullesebuch verschwunden. Dafür gibt es Märchen, Gedichte und Geschichten nach dem Herzen der Kinder.
What kind of effect did the Nazi books have on you? Do you remember?
Well, I guess I remember pretty well, because there wasn't any sentence in a book that wasn't really referring to propaganda. I think you can't imagine what it is being brainwashed all day long.
Were your friends or relations involved in the Hitler Youth movement?
I was.
You were?
I was.
How did you get involved in that? Was it, I know it's something that sort of spread like a wildfire over.
No, it was just...
It was almost compulsory.
Being a Jewish child, surrounded by kids that you played with, and that became Nazis, became Hitler Youth and so on, you felt very much you wanted to join too, and wanted to have their jackets and things like this.
Of course you weren't allowed to.
Hardly. All that you did here was, Jew die. From the very beginning. Trucks drove around through Berlin, yelling, Jews die.
Do you have any memories of the destruction of temples or children not showing up at school?
Well, the first thing I have memories of was the burning of the synagogue around the corner of our house then, and I just remember the smoke coming out of the building. Next day I went by and I saw people jumping on a piano in the rubble, and that was something that stayed with me as an image of the whole thing. Parents didn't talk to children because the children might denounce them. And I remember my sister, my younger sister, 5 years younger than I am, she admitted that at one time she was thinking about denouncing my mother. And she's a real nice woman. She was also a real nice kid, but she was thinking about denouncing my mother because she was talking with a garden fence to a neighbor who was considered politically unsafe. And
So Marcel Ophuls, he always uses a lot of archive material in his films, and so this is something we didn't want to do, but I think in his films it makes sense, and sometimes he also uses excerpts out of the films by his father, Max Ophuls, and so he tells you this family story about his own family in his own films as a documentary filmmaker. So he uses film excerpts from these feature films by his father. And
what's also maybe remarkable is that he doesn't leave his own family out, because he addressed the topic of National Socialism quite a lot. He made this amazing film about Klaus Barbie, and so for the 70s it's really one of the first films we know of that where you have a discussion: how did the perpetrator decide, how were they affected, how were they marked by the history of their parents and grandparents. And maybe we come back to our film and also how the women reacted. And what was quite interesting that, for example, there was a difference between first and second generation. For example, Catherine Klinger, the woman who showed the postcard before, she said when we approached her that she felt an immediate suspicion and aggression towards us. and that she felt that it was very relevant to talk about that aggression in the film. And actually she doesn't talk about it now in the film because we filmed several times, but in the book there is this quote, and this quote was also very important for us through the whole process. And she said this suspicion and also this skeptical attitude towards us will always be there, because there is really this difference between both sides, and you have to accept this difference as a radical one, otherwise you can't deal with each other only in a superficial way, and that's what is not interesting for her. And she really she's been working for 10 years with these issues now, and she's made a lot of conferences on the topic as well. And so she really said that people have to put themselves in a relation to those events between 33 and 45, and that the descendants have to come to terms with it. And yeah.
And now in our last exhibition in the Secession in Vienna, we tried to also bring this whole topic of the other side into the exhibition, but we interviewed Hannah Fröhlich, Jewish woman in Vienna, and she addresses the other side a lot. So this is another film excerpt, no, it's a video excerpt from the exhibition. So I click through the exhibition of the Secession so that you will get an impression of how this installation looked like. So there were 3 rooms, and in the first we addressed the emigration of the Phaidon Press, which was founded in Vienna by Bela Horowitz and others. And so this was somehow a strategy to bring something into the Secession, which is also dealing with art, because Phaidon Verlag did a lot of art books. And the daughter of Bela Horowitz, Ellie Miller, she's also an interview partner in our film. And she's also talking about this, the history of the Phaidon Verlag and how it was possible to sell it to London, to a press company there, and to save it from arisierung, confiscation of the Nazis, and then we also could talk to Ursula Seber from the Austrian exile library, and she also knew a lot about how the Phaidon books were made, and that they had that they produced a huge amount of books, and that therefore they could sell it very cheap. And so this was the first situation when you entered the exhibition. So you could get to know the whole story about the Phaidon Verlag and then Phaidon Press. And so this was the second room, and so there we could show the book you saw before, Zeitlose Kunst, one of the Phaidon books, and this is the former logo, and now this is the one they still use. And in the third room,
maybe before we go to the last room, we always forget saying this. The phone was very important. That was used on that book, Art Without Epoch, Zeitlose Kunst. It's a Futura phone, and for us it was very interesting that the Phaidon Press used grotesque phone, because its history is from modernism, and they used it to distantiate themselves from the books of Austro-fascism and the Nazi era, because they used this Fraktur form and like other forms. And so on the book you could also, the usage of this grotesque form was a statement against fascism. And for us it was interesting because we also use a grotesque form, and in a way it really nicely met our intentions with the project.
This was the second video installation, and dealing with the after effects, and two interview partners from London. They visited us in Vienna when we presented the book. For the presentation of the book, they came to Vienna, and there we could interview them again and talk about this being in Vienna and how they feel. And so the second video projection in this third room is with Hannah Fröhlich, and with Hannah Fröhlich we can see another like a test video we did, because here you can see it's a projection and two monitors, and we used one monitor for the footnotes and one monitor for the interview, and the projection was the English translation of what Hannah is talking about. And so the video we will show is a test still, so we try to bring all these three levels together. And so here you can see that these two projections on the After Effects and also on Vienna, they were presented opposite to each other, and so the viewer in the middle, sitting on these benches, always had to turn around to follow the interviews. Okay. Okay. Dann noch ein gutes Zeit. Ich komme gerade nicht zurück. Ja. So. Is it okay to show this last video? It's 7 minutes, and so I think this raises some questions on the perpetrator society, and yeah.
Da gab es zum Beispiel das Sprechen über den Graben, also ganz eben auch im Sinne von Ingrid Strobel. Dieser Graben, der Opfer von Tätern trennt, ja, Nachkommen von Opfern, Nachkommen von Tätern trennt. Und das war halt Thema, dieser Graben, ja, und auch auf der Seite von Täternachkommen war dann irgendwie so, also von Empörung bis Trauer darüber, ja, dass es sozusagen Leute gibt, die hier leben, die sich aber nicht wohlfühlen, ja, weil sie eben mit diesem Graben leben, mit diesem unüberbrückbaren Graben. Ja. Und dann gab es auch so von Täternachkommenseite immer wieder diesen Versuch zu sagen, ja, das muss man doch irgendwie zuschütten, also das muss man doch irgendwie überbrücken können oder so, ja. Und das geht aber nicht. Also das kann man nicht. Und das wäre auch sicher nicht der richtige Weg, ja, sondern richtiger ist einfach anzuerkennen, dass es unterschiedliche Perspektiven gibt und auch geben muss, weil unsere Geschichten unterschiedliche sind. Und vor allem anzuerkennen, dass unsere Geschichten uns beeinflussen, also unsere Sichtweise beeinflussen. Natürlich ist es so, dass eine große Differenz zwischen Opfern und Tätern einfach die ist, dass sich Opfer und Nachkommen von Opfern nicht aussuchen können, ob sie diesen Graben jetzt sehen oder nicht sehen. Also sie werden ihn sehen und sie müssen mit den Ambivalenzen fertig werden, die sich ergeben, wenn man hier lebt zum Beispiel. Umgekehrt auf Seite der Täternachkommen, da kann man schon auch drüber hinwegsehen und ja, man kann sich's aussuchen sozusagen. So wie die Ingrid Strobel halt sagt, ich kann die Augen zusammenkneifen und nichts sehen oder ich kann hinschauen. Und das ist auch so eine Differenz, die prägt. Die Sichtweisen determiniert und Umgang determiniert und Einfluss hat auf die politische Haltung. Ja. Also jemand hat irgendwas erzählt, ich weiß gar nicht mehr, also in einem anderen Zusammenhang und hat das Wort Selektion verwendet. Und einige von den jüdischen Teilnehmern haben sich an diesem Wort sehr erschreckt, ja, weil Selektion für sie eine ganz bestimmte Bedeutung hat. Und dann ging es über Sprache. Und ja, wieso, wenn wir anfangen, Worte nicht mehr zu verwenden und so, das kann man ja nicht machen. Und einer hat gesagt, ja, ich bin Philosoph und ich brauche die Sprache, so quasi nehmt mir meine Worte nicht weg. Ja, ja, ist schwierig, sehr schwierig. Ja. Aber wo eben auch diese Differenz sichtbar wird, sozusagen, sehe ich den Graben oder sehe ich ihn nicht? Das ist genau der Punkt. Ich glaube nicht, dass es diese Gruppen geben muss. Im Gegenteil, ich glaube, dass die Nachkommen von Tätern ganz andere Dinge zu bewältigen haben und das auch angehen sollten wie die Nachkommen von Opfern. Und dass dieses Zusammensetzen und miteinander reden, diskutieren, sich auch bepflegen gegenseitig, dass das auch deswegen falsch ist, weil es sozusagen beide in eine Ebene, sozusagen auf die gleiche Ebene stellt. Ich habe ein Problem damit, weil diese Gruppen davon ausgehen, dass man eben nur miteinander genug reden muss und dann sind die Vorurteile weg. Und ich glaube aber, dass es bei diesen Dingen nicht um diese Ebene sozusagen alleine geht. Ja? Dass eigentlich mit Vorurteilen hat das alles relativ wenig zu tun. Ich glaube wirklich, dass jeder Einzelne von uns den Auftrag hat, sich mit sich selbst auseinanderzusetzen und auch dieses Thema nicht auszusparen. Und ich glaube mittlerweile, dass das der einzig sinnvolle Weg ist. Also wenn ich das mal so radikal sagen darf, dann will ich wirklich alle Leute, die sich die sich politisch engagieren, denen österreichische Geschichte nicht egal ist, ja, dass die eigentlich über den Weg der Selbstreflexion ganz individuell nicht drumherum kommen.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe just a last thing we would like maybe to discuss afterwards. In a text by Dan Baon, he is one of the first researchers that were dealing with the after effects on both sides and their descendants. He writes on the position of nation states, and for example he writes how the post-war societies, how they define themselves. And here we would like to ask about the position of the Netherlands, how the discussion is here. And for example, Austria identified and still identifies with the first victim, unfortunately, although they have actively participated in the Nazi time. And he writes that the Dutch people are identifying a lot with resistance and the role of the supporters. Although when you look at the facts, you see that only 5% were in resistance here, and the other 5 were Nazi collaborators, and the rest of 90% was bystanders. And so maybe we can have a discussion on that later.
Well, thank you very much. We will have a talk after we will have seen and heard all our guests this afternoon. We'll create a little space to have a talk with all of you. We'll give a couple of minutes to Jan to prepare. I'll ask Ralph to help to rearrange. And if there are urgent questions now for Klub Zwei, please ask.